Hello, and welcome back to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, where we talk about everything, but not all at once. And this is my attempt to make a more radio-friendly version of the intro to the radio station. We thank all of you people for listening, and blah, 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 blah. Snake Bros! Snake Bros!
That's pretty good.
Okay. Well, I'm working on it. It'll get better.
Yeah.
Yeah, this podcast is where we say a whole lot about very little because we know a great deal about nothing.
Yeah, so last time we did a little bit of intro into the background of the name of the podcast, and we did some background on Kyle. I didn't do mine at all, so we might get into that today. There's some other topics we might bring up, but who knows? Really, it's a free-flowing conversation, so we'll just go from there.
Yeah.
So first of all, let's start with news. Anything in the news that's weird that you want to talk about that's not politics?
Well, you just read some story about flat earthers, and that I ran into a flat earther. Well, I thought the guy had been trolled by flat earthers. I was like, dude, those guys are trolls. But he was like, no, man, they really believe it. And I was trying to tell him, I'll pay for your plane ticket to fly around the United States or fly around the world and prove it. Like,
who is that?
Fly around the United States.
Fly around the United States.
Because that's all there is out here, you know? Ain't nothing but sea, shining sea. We got big skies here in Texas. Yeah. Anyway, go on with you. You were reading, who was that? Some basketball player?
Yeah. Apparently Shaquille O'Neal.
No way.
He's joined the ranks of flat earthers. Yeah. Like, he's really tall, and he can't see any roundness of the earth when he's standing up. So,
well, you know, he could be trolling.
Yeah, he could be. But apparently there's a bunch of other celebrities, too. I was convinced, because I've dealt with the moon hoaxers, right? And we actually know two people that claim to not believe that we ever landed on the moon. We won't say their names, but yeah, we know these guys.
Yeah, one of them's Mike.
We won't say their names, but one of them's called Mike. But yeah, you know, we've hung out with them before, and I got into a conversation with him about it once, and I couldn't believe it at the time because I had never really, at the time, which was a while back, I hadn't encountered anything like this. So I was just like, "Are you serious? Look at it, bro. It's right there." You know. But since then, of course, I've encountered plenty of them online.
Yeah, and you do a lot of that. I don't get online into the forums and do all the discussion or the comments and all that, but you do a lot of that.
Yeah.
Where you encounter all kinds of interesting people, and interesting opinions. And
yeah. And
I think that's cool. It's fueled a lot of great discussions on.
Yeah.
Between us.
I read, and like the steam level keeps rising, and I'm reading more, and I'm reading more, and finally, I'm like, oh, and I tell these people they're dumb. But yeah, keyboard warrior. Satisfying sometimes. And sometimes really great conversations come out of that. But yeah, so I mean, Above Top Secret has a whole huge list of moon hoax. They start the threads on purpose and just dare anybody to come and disprove their moon hoax ideas. And I fell for it a couple of times, and then eventually I realized these guys don't want to listen to what I'm saying.
The flag on the moon is not waving in the wind, Russ. It's obvious it's a fake.
You can't see any stars in the pictures they took from the moon.
Yeah.
Proof. Fake.
Explain that one. Why can't you see any stars? Is it because of the brightness of the
Yeah, the surface of the moon is almost white, and the day/night cycle on the moon is 2 weeks long because the moon only rotates around its own axis once a month because its rotation period around its axis is the same as its orbital period around the Earth. That's why we always see the same side of it. So that makes its day a month long. Basically, the daytime period is 2 weeks, and then there's a nighttime period 2 weeks, right? So when the astronauts were ever on the moon, they always landed in the daytime because it's pitch black. I mean, it's pitch black.
Well, then they could see one star
in
the sky.
The sun. That's not a real
star. But it wasn't in the picture.
That's right.
You're supposed to take pictures towards the sun.
So the surface of the moon is ash, mostly, and dust, and it's grayish and white, and it's bright. And so any camera, no matter how good, the distant stars in the black sky are they just don't show up because they don't put out enough light to overcome the brightness of the surface. So that's the reason for that. But you can't tell them that. They're like, no, we're told that the stars in the night sky in space are really, really bright.
How do we know that? Because we've been there and seen them? No.
Yeah.
Not according to your theory.
Yeah. Everyone knows that those aren't real stars. They're just holes poked in a black fabric.
But seriously, how can you even have that argument? How would they, if they believe that we have not been to the moon, how could they believe that they know what it looks like from the moon?
Right. I mean, and if you get, like, this is the thing I found out about arguing with them. If you get to a point to where they realize that there's no way they can sort of swivel around all the stuff you said, they just jump to the next thing that proves that we didn't go.
Yeah.
So they, and like you can start with the Van Allen belts. They believe that the Van Allen radiation belts around the Earth means that we couldn't leave the planet because the radiation in those belts is deadly. And I'm just like, the Earth is a ball, and supposedly these aren't flat earthers or whatever. They don't say that, but the Earth is a sphere.
How do you know that?
I don't know that. Maybe that's why they never believed my explanation of the belts.
You can't start with that.
But that's what I do. I'm like, so take a soccer ball and then take a belt like you would use for holding up your pants. Wrap it around that soccer ball.
There's nowhere to get out.
And then see if can't leave the soccer ball. Belt strapped you on there.
Yep. There's nowhere to go.
There's no way to get off this ball with this belt.
So I can kind of understand. I mean, I can understand that people would not, some people would believe that we didn't actually do that. It was a hoax because the Cold War was involved and all that.
Yeah.
And whatever. It's just, it's believable to me that people today and in modern times with modern technology would believe that we hadn't been there.
Right.
It's still kind of absurd, but it's understandable. But flat earthers, like,
right. I will say with the moon hoaxers that, like, I don't have a problem as much with the idea that first landing was faked, but later we were doing it for real. It was just they were trying to up the schedule or whatever.
Right.
So, like, I don't actually think that happened, but conspiracy theories are what they are, and like, I'm fine with them saying, like, like these first couple of landings, I think they're bogus, but then we eventually did get there, because that's an entirely different concept than what they're actually saying. Because, like, what it sounds to me like, my conspiracy theory on the moon hoax thing is that the purpose of it is to make people believe that we can't go to space at all. That's really what is about the moon hoax.
So who would be pushing for that?
Right.
Well, there's quite a few forces out there that might be pushing for
exactly, especially when you start to see things like, and this, I don't want to get into politics too much, but you'll see things like if you're in an economic discussion with somebody, they have this phrase, or one of the things they'll say is like, that endless growth on a limited planet is unsustainable. And that's a ridiculous thing to say when you're like, space? Because, the normal response is to be like, well, fortunately, we're not limited as a human race, and we can grow out into space.
Yeah.
But, so if you have this sort of agenda of, like, world domination through economic oppression, whatever, again, politics, I don't want to get into that. But if you want to just sort of suppress this and push the idea that, like, all control of everything needs to be given back to government so that they can control everything because we have limited resources and blah, 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 then, like, sort of, getting the idea out there that we actually can't go to space and it's all fake. So we can't expand off this planet. We're trapped here forever. And it's a limited resource thing. And so we can't use up our resources or whatever. And it needs to be, like, that is, all that stuff is made to order.
It's also, well, that just makes me think that it's amazing that people can simultaneously believe that the government would, like, do that kind of a hoax, at that level, and to trick everyone or to whatever, for whatever reason, to win a war, to do all this stuff. But then they think the government is capable of that level of deception.
Yeah.
And yet they want to turn over, like, everything.
Right.
Education, your education.
Yeah.
Your health.
The government tricked us about everything, but they won't trick us about this.
Yeah, dude. Wow. Anyway, we weren't supposed to go into politics. But damn it. Anyways. Pyramids.
So back to flat earthers though. Okay, so that was the moon hoaxers. That's my idea on them. But as I began to encounter, and this astounded me because I know about flat Earth because I study, just like Kyle, we study ancient beliefs, right? And so in esoterica, you have a sort of little fluffy story, right? About like fairy tales are a great example. Any fairy tale is a fluffy story that kids can remember, that kids can listen to and like and enjoy and sort of memorize the parts of it. But hidden using metaphor and other symbols and stuff underneath that story is ancient wisdom. That's what esoterica is. So flat Earth, the descriptions in ancient texts of the Earth having 4 corners or 4 pillars, with a tree in the middle. Like there's one I call Flat Earth 2.0, which is basically where the Earth isn't flat, but it's a dome. It's like a big hill, and there's a ring around the hill, and that's the oceans. That's Flat Earth 2.0. It's not flat; it's a dome.
Yeah.
And there's a big tree at the top of the hill holding everything up. Holding up the sky. Those are processional illustrations.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was gonna say. Like 4 corners, pillars.
Right. Yeah, those are all the pillars are the solstices and the equinoxes and like so.
Which procession is a circle.
Yeah, it's or a figure 8. That's why the infinite symbol is a symbol of the cycle or of infinity, of a figure 8 on its side because the sun traces an 8 symbol laid over on its side in the sky. So the whole flat Earth conversation is a misunderstanding of ancient wisdom.
But we encounter that everywhere with ancient wisdom, with all these ancient texts.
72 virgins, man.
Yeah,
it makes me sad to think of like the ancient wisdom concealed and ensconced in that text that has been turned into like so much death and destruction. With every major religion has done that. And you're just like, God, this was supposed to enlighten us about space.
That's why I love I'm going back to the parable thing. Like in the Bible, when Jesus tells the first parable, the disciples are like, why did you just talk to these people in parables?
What are you telling them?
And his answer to me is the answer to all of that, which is the knowledge was not for them, but it like the fairy tale is simple enough for them to remember. And within that story is contained the real knowledge that is only for a select few. Yeah. And the masses will repeat that story forever and thus make it available to one of the select few who comes along and hears it and will understand. Yeah. I love that.
So, and this is something I've been thinking about too. The focus on esoteric stories like that or whatever is always what is the hidden knowledge, and then following from that, how did they get this knowledge and ancient civilizations or whatever. But like, I'm also interested in the other side of it. Who is it that figured out if I tell a story like this, it will be told forever?
Yeah, exactly.
That is also a form of hidden knowledge. And I'm just like, wait, if I just made up a fairy tale right now, I almost guarantee you it isn't going to be, and I stood up on a mountain and told a bunch of people, like, do I think it'll be told 5,000 years from now? No. How are they making up these stories where they know that when you tell this story, it will go down through the ages? Like that is also a hidden technology.
Yeah, that's true.
Some kind of weird understanding of the human mind.
And that seems to me that it would take a long period in human terms of studying the human race and understanding philosophy and all of these things to get that about humanity.
Archetypes they use. They use archetypes. Like,
yes.
And it's like, so there was at some distant past an understanding of archetypes, and like if you put these types of symbols in stories, they will just plug into the human mind and be retold. That's fascinating.
Yeah. I aspire to follow in those footsteps, like with my music and my lyric writing. Yeah. I want to encode, that same story of our even modern day knowledge, along with ancient knowledge that has been passed down, and kind of like the guy who wrote Star Wars or whatever is
Lucas.
saying like, I don't even know this guy. Like,
You're not a real nerd. Get out of here.
Nerds are gonna get mad at me. Sorry, nerds. Anyway, Star Wars is great, but I'm just trying to save face over here.
You're digging a bigger hole.
Okay, I'll stop digging. Anyway, how he
We
says
call it even.
he says that he's just telling an old story in a new way.
Yeah.
And I kind of I want to be able to do that too with with some of this ancient knowledge and in a song it's like it's limited because it's a very short story, so I have to like compress all of this stuff down into very like archetypal.
Right. And it's interesting too. I have recently, that makes sense. And I've recently read and listened to some people who have said that like in music, in lyrics at least, the more utterly superficial the top level meaning is, the better it works for the deep esoteric stuff.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That reminds me. What was...
And so like that, I mean, does that not kind of like sort of rearrange 180 degrees all of ideas about pop music? Because, they're like, oh, baby, I miss you. And you're like, oh, my God. But there's like...
Man, I'm going to have to go back and listen to all that again and see what they're really saying.
Yeah. What was the game with Jack Black? That was my favorite example of that, where they're the death metal band, but it was like pop death metal or whatever.
Yes.
The kids are out there. It's like, girlfriend.
Yeah. He gets all mad.
Yeah.
He just like shakes his head.
He's like, oh
God. Brutal Legend.
Brutal Legend. Yeah, that's a great game.
But
Dear
speaking
Dark
of that that idea you were talking about, the surface level meaning, reminds me of something you read to me a while back when we were coming back from the middle of nowhere off of a job about these, I don't know what they were, sages or whoever they were, that they spoke or wrote about language there being 3 or 4 levels of language.
Yes.
And that common people speak and understand the first level, but while they're doing that, they're also speaking these other levels of meaning and understanding in the language, and they're not even aware of it. But the people who can understand that,
the sages,
they'll pick up information that people do not even know that they're saying,
right,
from what the people are saying. And I guess you could look at that in many different ways. But the fact that they had broke it down into 4 levels, and they spoke of it that they are specific.
Yeah.
Very like.
That was a
my curiosity.
That was a Graham Hancock book. I wonder if that was that not in the end of Fingerprints of the Gods?
Could be. I listened to the audiobook, and I don't think that was.
Maybe it was in Underworld. No, it was probably in Supernatural.
Well, I listen to audiobooks while at work doing a bunch of things, and that's why I have to listen to them multiple times, because I won't even realize that I'm not paying attention while I'm measuring stuff.
He finished Magicians of the Gods, and I'm like, all right, so did you hear that part about Gulumpetang and the guy there? And he's like, about what? Yeah. I'm like the 3 chapters on that?
Yeah.
Listen to it again, man. Come on.
Yeah. No, I was busy messing up the vineyard and redoing it.
Yeah, this is not something I was planning on talking about, but it just came up. Like what time we got here? What are we at?
We're at 1833.
Okay.
It's an esoteric number.
No, does it? The ancients were, I mean, like, at least for what we can see now, the little we can glean, there's agriculture, architecture, and astronomy are the main 3 things that we see. And that may just be a product of what's left. It's difficult to tell. The beginnings of agriculture, more and more I'm believing now that, like, what our archaeologists are finding is not the beginning. It doesn't make any sense as a beginning. The Jericho, I'm sure most everybody's familiar with the city of Jericho, at least the name of it. But that city has been found to be one of the most ancient, consistently occupied places on Earth. It's still occupied today, and they've dug down layers and layers and layers and layers of cities on top of each other. And the deepest ones are 9,000 BC, so we're talking about 11,000 years old. People were already living in Jericho.
Wow.
And those oldest cities are very strange looking. Like obviously we can only see what you would call the floor plan, right? Because all that's left is like the foundations of stuff. It's just, it's been flattened. But like there are huge buildings that have multiple rooms that are all the same size, like cells. Like so it'll be a long rectangle, and there's 3 rows of square rooms, and they're like multiple sections of them all the way down, and there's no doorways. Like what is that building for? It looks like a giant battery. Like it's like a huge box with a sets of 3 cells going all the way down, and it's like there's no entrance to any of these quote unquote rooms. It's anyway, the lowest levels of that, you have these strange buildings, but also the midden areas, the place where people threw their trash and stuff, show that the people who showed up and settled the first Jericho did not have they were eating native plants and animals. So they were hunting wild animals. Basically, they were doing hunter-gatherer stuff, but they're building a city, okay? And it's not a village. This was a city, right? I mean, or I guess maybe you might call it a town. But it had stone foundations, and these people weren't throwing up teepees and thatch. They were building serious structures. And they just showed up out of nowhere. And we're talking about, again, 11,000 BC, okay? Mm-hmm. So 11,000 BC, these people just appear out of nowhere. There's no one knows where they came from. They appear out of nowhere. They throw up all these stone structures with weird giant batteries and stuff or whatever. But they're eating. The equivalent now would be like we're building a city out in the middle of America somewhere, and if somebody was looking through our trash, they would see that we were eating deer, bison, and whatever local plants we could forage out of the forest, right? In other words, we weren't growing any crops, and we didn't have any domesticated cattle. These people just showed up and they're eating whatever's around in the area while they're building this city. So up to a decade or so later, in the Midden Piles, there began to appear the remains of what were obviously domesticated versions of the local animals and domestic crops of the local plant life. And there were some that were not domestic too, but the point is that we can't do that. We don't know really. We're not really
10 years or whatever.
Well, I mean, yeah, but really, do you know of any animal that has been domesticated? People will have they got tigers for pets, but those tigers are still tigers, right? Even many generations down the line, they're still tigers. And yet,
so wait. Then so you're suggesting, or
I don't know what I'm suggesting. I'm just trying to say
are you saying that what we know of as say like domesticated cattle and domesticated dogs and domesticated cats are a different sort of species almost because of their domestication?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so you're gonna have to explain that to me.
Right. So,
something having to do with Inky, the Anunnaki.
Yeah, I'll get into that because that is part of this I didn't think of. But yeah, you're right. So a domestic crop plant is so drastically different from anything wild that a lot of them we're not even really sure what the original version was.
So they talk about corn being
has no wild version.
But I've heard things like, oh yeah, in school, it didn't used to have all these big fat seeds all like this on it. That's
it was
a
presumption.
Smaller and flatter, but they're presuming that they don't have any fossil evidence or anything.
There's no extant or extinct versions of it that's been found.
Bananas?
What?
Bananas?
Don't get me into the banana conspiracy.
Okay.
We'll have to do a whole podcast on bananas! God damn it!
Fruit of the snake. Where do they come from?
Yeah, fruit of the snake. It's human pills. Bananas are human pills. We'll get into that later.
Man pills.
That's right. So, you gotta have man pills if you're gonna be hurling humans.
Yeah.
Okay. So briefly for now, maybe we can get into this later on in the podcast. A domestic animal or plant is so different from any wild version that sometimes it's very difficult to even tell, to the point where we don't know what the wild version, like they know that the wild version of the what we now call cows was the aurochs.
Okay. I gotcha.
But think of the aurochs and of cattle. Like they don't even.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even. Yeah. The difference is night and day. Like an aurochs is huge and terrifying. I mean, a bull nowadays is kind of scary. I mean, it's pretty scary, especially if they're running at you. But an aurochs, an aurochs will run through a semi truck and not notice. They're huge. I mean, they're just just massive. Maybe the back of a semi truck, But so these people showed up out of nowhere and just bam, like it's really in almost no time at all. They just suddenly whap. They have domestic versions of the local plant and animal life.
So, like in Monty Python, when the guy starts reading, "Let there be wheat and barley and flaxseed and all this,"
he's calling out domestic crops.
Right, and then that kind of stuff is in all types of ancient texts.
Yeah,
like where they just they list off all of this.
Right, and they're calling it the bounty of God or whatever, and
it's the cornucopia.
Yeah, like the point is that like if you think of trying to live on this earth without all that stuff. Like, you're basically trying to eat wild. Okay,
you're running around a butt flap.
Yeah, the easiest version to look at, and this is, there's no visualization, and most people have never seen pictures of this. I haven't seen pictures of it, but the one of the crops that they know the original versions of is grain. Okay, so those are grass basically. They call them wild grasses, right? So we have these. If you look at our version, like anybody who's seen like Gladiator. Right, that this one of the signature scenes in Gladiator is he's dreaming of being home, and you just see his hand dragging through these huge, fat, heads of grain. Okay, and they're beautiful. They're all orange and bright, and they're, 3 or 4 feet tall, and the heads of grain on the top are just massive. Well, if you look at the native grasses versions of those that they think that these came from, the grasses might grow to 2 or 3 feet tall, but the grain heads are little tiny, little bitty things that have seeds in them. They're not, they don't look like, man, I could cook that up and make a bowl of rice. They're just drastically different. So yes, so in this same area, the Jericho area, are where the native grasses are that we all over the world use as grains. So, whoever was doing this Jericho project, the original city there that I was talking about, they were building, it is their domestication of native grasses, plus the people at Göbekli Tepe a little earlier, and they may have been the same people, we don't know, are responsible for all the grains we have. Okay, So what I was originally, detangentizing this conversation once. Detangentizing, yeah, this podcast should be called Tangent Bros. Building and planting are all over ancient stuff. Like that's just and so Kyle and I have been in construction our entire lives, and in some capacity, not as much as I don't have as much experience in this as I would like to, and Kyle has some of it too. But in moving very heavy loads, right?
Yeah.
And so this is why when we're looking at things like Baalbek, or the pyramids, or just looking at how these people are moving.
Or looking at Sacsayhuaman.
That's right, I like looking at Sacsayhuaman. That name is so strange.
Yep.
It's shaped like a puma. If you zoom out, like the walls, the jagged walls are like the mane of the cat. Anyway,
you're detangentizing right now, man.
Yeah. So detangentizing. We have done a lot of building. We're just now, and this is fascinating to me because we're getting into a period of our lives where we would like to go to some of these places and look at them and do some serious study. That keeps getting stalled, and then suddenly we got this farming job.
That's right.
And we're like, oh, that's why.
Yeah, and the two main things that we're growing are olives, and grapes, and those two things are. Like as far back in antiquity as you can go, like the idolized things to be grown.
And like the other cool thing I've always thought of is like the olive branch is considered to be like that was the gift to the god Apollo when you went to get the oracle. You brought an olive branch,
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, so once we get these olive trees going, if we can do it right, we'll be able to bring olive branches and be like, okay, tell me something.
And we're gonna be making wine too.
Yep, so making wine. So
Vitis.
Mm-hmm. So it's like we have to delve into this aspect. Like there's the two different main occupations.
Someone is preparing us for something because we were doing construction, moving big stones.
That's right.
And then now we're learning how to plant crops.
Right,
so.
and also The other main thing that ancient people did was mining, and the guy who we're building the orchard for is in mining. So it's like, well, this makes sense.
That's cool. Well, we're gonna start breaking up our podcast into different episodes, roughly 30 minutes long, and we've reached that point in this one. So
I'm gonna take a break.
We're gonna take a little break.
We'll be back with you
You're gonna
guys.
hear some kick-ass bumper music like this.
Bumping.
No, it's gonna be more kick-ass than that. We're working on it, but we'll be back in a little bit. Thanks for listening. Snake Bros. Okay, welcome back to Brothers of the Serpent, and this is part 2 of the second episode.
Well, it's
part 2.2.
It's second half of the first hour.
Actually, this is the first episode because the pilot is not technically considered episode 1.
The pilot is episode 000.
The pilot is where we made all of the mistakes that we're hopefully never going to make again, such as phenomenons, which are multiple copies of a John Travolta movie.
That's right.
Anyways,
Phenomenons. Yeah, in the future we plan to have a We're Dumb section where basically, we review things that we got totally wrong in the previous podcasts. So we'll be like, so phenomenons, we're dumb. It's not, it's phenomena.
And then we also discussed possibly having actually making Russ's dream come true, having a contest to see, if any listeners have great ideas about how to become an out-of-place artifact.
Yes, that is.
Because it's just fun.
Yeah.
And
I actually don't. I have thought of many different ideas, which I'll go through some at some point. But man, I just can't come up with one. But it's like really where you're like, yes,
yes, that's it.
That's
it.
Really. I guess the hardest thing is like, will they find you? But
that
you kind of
can't worry
a chance. Yeah, it's like if they find me,
can't worry about
is
that.
What it has to be.
You might be blended up in a tidal wave. You never know if you're going to be a fossil. So just
blended.
Anyway, at the end of the last segment, we were talking about these main 3 things in ancient times.
Yeah, that we can see. Yeah.
That we can see that it seems like the ancients are very concerned about, or that these things are revered by them, and that is agriculture, architecture, and astronomy.
The triple A's.
Yeah. So Russ had brought up Jericho because of this strange thing about where they were digging up and finding suddenly that they had domesticated animals and
crops,
crops and
just
all that.
I mean, just pretty much.
But in many other cultures where they found evidence of farming and crops, there's been that same problem that, man, these domesticated crops just bam, they were there.
Yeah.
And a lot of the ancient texts tell us that they were given to humanity by the gods. So
right, and as of right now, the earliest evidence of domestic crops shows up at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. And it is the native grasses in that area that still are in that area, that there are still wild weeds, grasses around there.
And architecture at Göbekli Tepe. They supposedly invented both megalithic architecture and farming.
Yeah, and agriculture. And the concept of not being a hunter-gatherer.
Right.
Because that's hard to accept. Right.
I mean, especially to me, look, I want to give those people who took the time to write down what they knew and preserve it, or do their best to preserve it. I want to respect them by actually taking their word for it.
Right. And
I want to believe that what they're telling me is the truth as best they knew it. And they're saying, well, these other things came and gave it to us.
Right. Well, Göbekli Tepe specifically, there is no writing from that we know of.
I'm speaking more of the Sumerians.
But their words are clear in their architecture that those guys knew what they were doing. They weren't making this up as they went. And before, his name is Klaus Schmidt.
I don't know.
Before the German archaeologist there had a sudden, crazy, insane heart attack and died. He was digging. He had moved over to the other side of the hill, and now Göbekli Tepe is a hill. The hill is called Göbekli Tepe. which means Mountain of Enlightenment. But basically no, that's not right. That's Gunung Padang. But yeah, Göbekli Tepe is a hill that was built over time as the people that were making these circles covered them up. Okay. He dug up 3 or 4 enclosures on one side of the hill, and then they had GPR scans done of the entire area and found out that there were, as many as 50, 60, maybe even up to 100 enclosures buried under that hill. And so what they did just before he died is they had moved over to the other side of the hill to the area they thought was the oldest, because he was looking for the beginning, hoping to find out that they didn't know what they were doing when they started. And instead they're digging up one of the oldest enclosures, and they found that, what, you got it?
It means Potbelly Hill. Okay,
right.
Okay, that's in Turkish.
Yes, in Turkish.
I think there's another.
So it is, yeah, that's what I thought. It's the same with Gunung Padang. Like, to them it means, in the local language or whatever, it means Mountain of Enlightenment, but
Now that was in Magicians. I don't remember what the other meaning was.
Yeah. So anyway, they started digging on one of the oldest enclosures, and what they found, of course, was that
Klaus Schmidt also was.
Klaus Schmidt, I got it right. What they found was that the pillars were larger and better made, and the high relief on them were far better quality. And like the difference with carvings, you have high relief and low relief. Low relief is where you carve out the wall, so you got this flat plane, and then you dig into the rock to carve out your pictures, right? So the carving is imprinted in to the wall. A high relief is where you dig out the wall and leave the carving parts, the figures, sticking out of the. That's way harder to do, to where basically you run your hand across it and the figures are protruding. That's high relief, and it's much, much more difficult to do high relief than it is to do low relief. And so all the pillars at Göbekli Tepe are high relief. Well, not all of them. I guess there are some that are low relief, but those look like older or newer carvings, and that's the thing. So you have these amazing T-pillars with all this intricate stuff protruding out from them, but all very stylized and beautiful. Yeah. I mean, they had think of that. They had an advanced art form.
Right.
And we're talking about
with the architecture. I mean,
the modern archaeology.
To try to build any structure that's round. Let's say that they were roofed. We don't really know if they were, but just standing up columns. Like, we've poured concrete columns that were, I think they were 12-inch diameter. We used sonotube, which is basically like a hardened cardboard tube with a wax interior, so that it doesn't stick to the concrete. And you can typically get them in like 8-foot sections or 10-foot sections or whatever. And we got the longest sections we could, but the columns needed to be like 4 foot higher or something. So we had to add a cut off piece of another one to that, and we had to brace them. They were freestanding on top of a poured and leveled slab. Of concrete. So and the slab had anchor bolts coming up from the bottom. So this is like an anchor bolt, the easiest way we could possibly do this, right? Yeah. And we run rebar up the center to metal rods to reinforce the concrete, and then we had to build these collars that went around the sonotube out of wood, and then
frames against that to hold them up.
Yeah, to stand them up. So 4 legs coming down to make sure they were plumb. And then, we got a concrete pump truck, and we'd sling that thing way up there and then fill it up and vibrate it to get the concrete to settle. And it was just, that is a very difficult thing to do. These guys cut the stones out of a hill and then moved them over to where they were, and they
stood them up.
They cut pockets in the bedrock, limestone bedrock, for them to sit in.
Yeah, little sockets.
And then they stood them up and set them down in there. And I don't know if they did the high relief carvings before or after this, but to try to move a piece of stone that big and then stand it up and have it be plumb in this socket that you carved out with what tool?
Plumb meaning it's standing up perfectly straight.
Right, it's level, it's not going to fall over, it's not leaning. Right. And then
just the idea of cutting a socket out of the stone, of the bedrock, and having the bottom of that be flat
enough.
That is not easy.
So just imagining that we poured these columns and and then we had to then move them somewhere and then stand them up on. I mean, I can't even.
And
imagine.
again, ours had anchor bolts. But like you said, an anchor bolt is basically where you've poured the concrete slab and you leave pieces of metal coming up out of the concrete. So that when it dries, you've got these pieces of metal sticking out of the concrete that you then pour your column onto, so that it's attached, anchored to the slab. They didn't have that. There's no anchor bolts.
And these things are still standing.
No, they did bury them, but it's just.
But still, okay. You hold this while I bury it.
Right.
Right.
Oh man. So
they didn't have a backhoe.
So this is why we were bringing up the fact that we've done a lot of building, because in a lot of the if you've watched Ancient Aliens or whatever, anything like that, when you're looking at these ancient structures, things people will bring up, and if you don't know about precision, some people will seem to be flipping out about what doesn't seem like a big deal to you. That like, oh, the pyramid is like, is oriented to the cardinal directions down to like 1/60th of 1 degree, and like that's a big deal. And people are like, well, okay, so like we're used to very precise things in the modern age, but I'm telling you, when we build stuff, even in the modern age, like I'll just say this: a modern home construction builder is fine with an accuracy of 1 inch.
Yeah.
Okay, the pyramids were done with accuracies of 0.000001 inch in some cases, and that is a structure that's huge. And
like the key. I think it's the King's Chamber is, if I got this right, I could be wrong. One of the chambers that's all granite on the interior it's like so level, level on the floor, and the walls are so vertical, like like the degree you're talking about of precision. And that thing is 300 feet up in the air off the base.
Right. And it's perfectly centered.
That's not up in the air. It's 300 feet up into that pyramid structure.
Right.
It's like, what?
So because we've done building, and if you're over there, you're cutting boards for the construction guy, and like you're off 1/4 inch, they're like, it's not a big deal. 1/4 inch. Yeah. If you got off 1/4 inch when you're on one block when you're building the pyramid, you end up with a fucked up corkscrew. You don't have a pyramid. You can't do it. I mean,
so going back to lining it up to the cardinal directions and how ridiculously accurate they got that. None of our modern buildings are that accurate.
Right.
Okay. We've done in modern times or more modern times alignments to the cardinal directions, and they're not even close.
Right. But the Capitol buildings in D.C.
I tried to do this with a water tank that was basically going to be like a small pool set in the ground, and I got these big natural stones that were pointed, and they were too big for me to lift, but some of them I could slide on the ground or
so
pick up one end and flip it over.
You're going to make a compass rose, right?
Right. Yeah. I made the compass rose around this round water trough, and
tried to point them to due north.
Yeah. And so I used a compass, and I tried to line it up.
And so if you're using a compass, those aren't cardinal. That's magnetic.
That's true. Magnetic.
So these people with the pyramid, it's cardinal. They knew the difference between the magnetic north, which is not the same as, and depending on where you are on the planet, it shifts. So if you're not in Egypt, if you're over in the United States, the angle that magnetic north is off from cardinal north is not the same.
My point was simply that I had this direction. I was going to make these rocks, I was going to point this one this way, the other one 180 degrees from that, the other one 90 degrees from that, and so on and so forth. Yep. And I had the thing sitting there telling me which directions they were, and it was so hard. I had to go nudge this one this way, and then it didn't look even all the way around. I move this one. Okay, this one needs to slide up around. It was just
right. And those are the ones that you could slide a little bit.
Yeah, we're talking about stones
or whole buildings. You can't slide a building around. So the precision levels are a big deal, and this is the thing. Modern archaeologists, they don't know anything about construction either. They've never built anything.
Well, they built a big roof over Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah, they hired a contractor. And I bet you he is
Which is another problem, because now you can't study any of the possible astronomical alignments, because they don't even believe that they had that knowledge yet. Well, why do you assume that when supposedly they just created agriculture and megalithic architecture, and you just assume that they didn't know anything about astronomy at that point? Why? Yeah. Why would you assume that?
Right. Well, because you can sort of fluff past them generating the domestic crops and animals because we don't know how to do it, right? We do know how difficult astronomy can be, so it's hard for them to say, well, they just a bunch of dudes in butt flaps came up with this overnight. You can't do that with astronomy because we understand how difficult it is. But with domestic stuff,
it's frustrating to me that any scientist in any field would just automatically disregard something like that because of some paradigm without looking. I mean, this dude was uncovering something that was blowing away the entire
the whole paradigm of human development.
You know, and like to just throw that out there. Oh, no, they didn't know that back then. Well, how do you know? You didn't know they had what you're digging up right now.
You've been wrong this whole time, and now you expect me to think you're right. Well, and I mean, but look what they did. Look at the National Geographic on Göbekli Tepe. Like, just look at the cover. The cover shows their artist's idea of what it was like for the people building it. Right. And you see, like, the T-pillars, just like they are now, but they've put in these crappy, you know, like these crappy walls made of like local rocks that are not. There's no masonry done to them all. They just kind of stacked. So they show these rocks stacked up around the pillars to make a circular structure, and then people in butt flaps walking around it, and you're just like, oh my god. Yeah.
Well, but maybe it's because it was hot there, Russ.
People wear butt flaps when it's hot. Yeah. Building stuff in bikinis, but it's because. And when in Graham Hancock's book, when he's talking to Klaus Schmidt, he asks him directly. He's like, "So, this sort of blows away the whole concept of human urban development and the idea that of when we started to do these things." And he said no, that he believed that this was that it accentuated the current paradigm, that it made it more understandable. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
This is Göbekli Tepe. At the time that the pyramids in Cairo, the Great Pyramid and everything, at the time those pyramids were being built, Göbekli Tepe was older to those people. Yeah, at the time supposedly they were built. Yeah. You have to put that caveat in there. So at the time that they believed that the pyramids were built in Cairo, Göbekli Tepe was already older to those people than the pyramids are to us now.
Right. That's...
Okay? That is how much farther back there this is. It is like you go to Sumer, which is maybe you could say maybe 1,000 years previous to like the oldest kingdoms of Egypt. Previous to Sumer, you got to go back 6,000 years before you get to Göbekli Tepe. That is as long as recorded history.
Right. So, hey, nothing profound could have happened during that period.
No, of course not. Right. Like they built Göbekli Tepe and then they were like, man, that sucked. Let's go back to being dudes in butt flaps.
Okay, so to try to continue on this thing about the 3 A's, the triple A.
Well, you had something about Jericho. I want to hear about that.
Oh yeah, it just occurred to me when he was talking about Jericho a while ago that I remember the biblical story of Joshua's war with Jericho or whatever, and I looked it up in the break, and Joshua took his army and the Ark of the Covenant, okay, which is some. I mean,
it's a new part.
Go into that.
Come on, it's a new part. That is an anachronism.
The Ark of the Covenant. They take that and they are told by God to march around the city one time each day for 7 days, and on the 7th day march around the city 7 times, and then
make a shitload of noise.
Make a bunch of noise. They had all these priests with ram's horns. They were all supposed to blow their horns at the end, and all the people in the army shouted, and the walls came down. And it occurred to me that this is another parable. This is the numbers in that story sound to me like something processional or possibly telling us a different story. There's a hidden knowledge in that story. And, one that I came up with off the top of my head is the idea of an age, because you brought up the fact that the ram's horn is the
signifying age of Aries, which is the age that it was in. Yeah, so right. that gives you the plug-in. Like, okay, this is processional. They're blowing ram's horns. That's Aries.
Right, and Jericho, as you described, is this place of ancient civilization. Yeah. Okay, that sprung up. So it's almost like telling us a story about the end of an age and the end of an epoch, destroying an advanced civilization. And it's couched in this symbol of a war, but again, they were commanded to carry this artifact that had divine properties of destruction right?
Yeah.
The Ark of the Covenant around this building 7 times. And thinking of just procession in general, like with comets and all that, these things are circling around us, and sometimes they hit, and the horn blast and the yelling is like the cataclysm that comes that tears down the civilization.
That's really okay. So I've never.
And they all run in and they loot everything and all this stuff, and then of course there's the additional aspect of the story. There was a spy within,
and one person, they survived. That part of the wall doesn't come down.
That's right.
Okay, so this is fascinating.
The spy was given special knowledge. Go to this part of the building.
That's right.
And you will not be
Take
destroyed.
Your family there.
We're looking at the story of Noah. It's the same type of deal.
That's cool. Okay, so as you were saying that, I just remembered, and this also was probably in Graham Hancock's book where I was reading about the initial Jericho in the first place, but he talked about the walls of those oldest cities, and he said they are... He spent a lot of time talking about how, there's not a lot of... in these ancient cities, you don't see stuff that makes you think of war. You don't see ramparts. You don't see, weapons. You don't see things where you think that they were like putting a wall around their city to guard from armies and stuff. But Jericho... He mentioned this especially. He was like, these were walls that were they were 30 meters thick.
Right.
And they went all the way around it in a perfect square. He was like, these weren't walls to hold out an army. These were walls to hold out a flood.
Right. Yes.
Or something, some cataclysm. Basically the city could be, you could have an ocean around it, and it would be a hole in the water because the walls would hold out the water, right?
Dam.
Yeah. So... in your idea that this war at Jericho with Jacob is a symbol of procession.
Joshua, yeah.
I'm sorry, Joshua. It's the same guy.
Same guy.
Yeah, whatever. Biblical names, whatever. Jay. Those walls are to protect from cataclysm.
Right. So something happens 7 times.
Mm-hmm. And the walls come down. So you have in an ancient city that has walls that specifically protect from cataclysm, and then you have the story, here's a processional symbol, and those walls came down anyway, and the ancient civilization was destroyed.
Yes.
Man.
So that's one way of looking at it. And we like to look at, we love like taking these ideas, like once you get this idea of procession and you start seeing the numbers, anytime there's a number in an ancient text, as we talked in the pilot episode. Yes. That's like a trigger. We start looking, okay, well, what else is in here? What other information?
Right.
Russ brought up the ram's horns. There's so much of that in these ancient texts. So it's really cool to think about these stories that were told. To me, I keep it in mind all the time about the parable and looking at the stories themselves. Like even the story of Jesus is a parable.
Yeah.
That contain hidden knowledge about past civilizations, which I believe is what all of this stuff is.
Right. We've told you in the pilot episode that we have all these various little terms and phrases and stuff that mean that we've given definitions specifically, because so much of the stuff we talk about, it requires hundreds of words to describe some concept, and we're like, man, that we need some easy way to say that because we're going to be saying it all the time. So we come up with our own. So one of them is these eyes, right? And this concept is awesome. So once you start to learn this stuff, you start to learn, wow, these numbers, if I see a specific number, like a really strangely specific number in some ancient text, that is a flag. Or if I see a reference to anything that connects to any of the zodiac symbols, that's another flag, right? So then what we would say is, I need to go back and look at that with these eyes.
Right.
Because these eyes now understand that, and you read it and you just get so much more than you did before.
Exactly. So I remember this story of the walls of Jericho from my childhood when I was going to Bible school.
Right.
And Russ bringing up Jericho made me like, I need to go look up this battle that happened that brought down the walls with these eyes.
That's right. And you read it, you're like, holy crap!
Yeah,
there's, I knew before I was going to look at it that there was more, but damn!
And that awesome. That just makes me think of so many other things too. So many of the stories that I learned, and which I've since found out are also stories contained in many other than non-biblical texts.
Yeah.
Other ancient texts like the story of the Tower of Babel and the confusion of tongues.
The confusion of tongues.
It was really one of the first big stories of the Bible that
we spent a lot of time on Babel, and that one's still.
Right.
Oh man, we could do multiple.
Because to me, like language, going back to what we talked about in the first part, these levels of language. We began to talk about language for many reasons, but Russ had brought up some strange things about language, where a lot of things that we do seem to homogenize.
Yeah.
We as humans do. The knowledge spreads around and everybody kind of gets to do it. Like take smartphones, for example, or the automobile.
Right.
Like everybody kind of gets it, and then you can go to Europe and they're driving on the other side of the road, but whatever, no big deal.
Once somebody gets a good idea, and that's like a really good way to do it, that gets passed around. We share these information.
Right.
Like a simple thing is a drill.
Whereas language, it almost goes in the opposite direction. When you could take a group of people that all speak the same language, and then you separate them by just, say, in the United States, you put one person up there in the Northeast and the other person down here in Texas, and after a couple of generations, they can't understand each other. Mm-hmm. We're like, hey, y'all, what y'all doing up here in New York?
What horrible accent.
Yeah.
Why in the world don't you learn how to talk like a normal human being?
I don't know what the hell you just said.
Whatever you said.
So it's weird how it sort of gets separated. And I mean, even looking at the English-speaking people that came here from Great Britain, our accents are just vastly different after a couple of 100 years.
Yeah, and I since then anyway, we'll keep going with this. Yeah, so language tends to diversify, down to dialects or whatever. But like there's thousands, who knows how many languages we had, plus the written ones. They're all different. Whereas, like he was saying initially, most of the stuff we tend to do, they converge. They homogenize. We get to where we're sharing this. And like if I see like I was saying earlier, a drill that was made in Japan, it's a drill. I recognize, that's going to drill into something.
Yeah. If you're a carpenter, like all of these specific
all the tools
things, and all the tools are the same, and the way you do things is very similar.
Math is the same way. Math being a universal language, or geometry, those don't change across culture. And yet, when we talk, all you have to do is like live apart for a while, apparently. And so, and I've since thought about that, and I think that the example you brought up, where you got people in New York and then people come down to the South. And like within a few generations, and not just that, they're leaving Britain and coming to the United States, and suddenly they're talking like Yankees within a couple of generations. Like they lose their British accent, or they come up with the American one. What's happening there? To me, the fact that happens very quickly and then stops happening. Right? Like people in Texas are not getting deeper Southern accents. Like there are deep Southern accents, but it's not getting deeper. Just like up in New York City.
So you're saying somebody moves to Texas and they slowly get the Texas accent and then they're done.
It seems to be an environmental thing to me. Like maybe it's
has some people I've noticed it never changes. Like, you're like, where are you from? They're like, oh, I've been living here for like 30 years, and you're like, wow,
right. Yeah, right. So maybe it happens in the formative years of childhood, or whatever. But what I'm trying to say is, like, I'm not talking about specific people, but more along the generations, because you get people in the Northeast of the United States, they lose their British accent. Some of them come down to the South and start talking differently. But that change eventually stops. Like, there's a separation that happens there, but after a while, it stops separating. The New York accent is not getting thicker. The Texas accent's not getting thicker. They've gone a certain distance apart, and they've stopped there. And now it's been many, 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 many generations. Like, you would think that if they were already talking like that after a couple of generations, that we would be so far apart now that we can't understand each other at all. But
there's another thing that's happening too, where communication across vast distances is getting better and better.
Right, and we're beginning to. I mean, like, English is now the language of the internet. Like, I talk to people all the time, and I find out, like, this is not your native language, and like, wow, you speak it better than most of my friends. Yeah. And me, and my brother. But the point is that there is something strange about language in general. It's just harkening back to that story of the Tower of Babel and the confusion of tongues. I think you also think that there is some, in that story is preserved some knowledge about language, or what I call it, the magic of language. I think it's very very strange. There's something going on there, and there's something to study, because within it, like in the first part of this podcast, you talked about how the ancient people figured out, or how could they figure out that you can couch these ideas in these parables, and that those archetypes will be remembered and repeated. So there's something, it's almost like hypnosis, right?
You can hypnotize somebody by talking to them very gently. Oh yeah, and by the way, watch my watch.
Yeah.
But